Thank you for coming to the Ortigas Library this afternoon to listen to Mrs. Fely Zafra-Reyes. I'll call her Fely, somewhat informal. Um, it's so incredible when people come to our library to look at our exhibits. And so I saw these two ladies come in, and they were curious. They looked at everything. So I said, well, I've got to make some conversation with these ladies. So I introduced myself, and then this lady here just said, "Can I see that room?" Which was the rare book room. And you know, we just don't open the rare book room to anybody. But she was somewhat impertinent, so I said, "Okay, we'll go see the rare book room." And then she started looking over the maps and poring over the maps and really trying to figure out where Malate was and Ermita was and trying to find where her grandmother's house was. And I asked her why. And she said, "Oh, in World War II." And that was the start of it. And I realized that this Fely was quite a person who knew her period of World War II very well. And she had asked for volume 10 of the Philippine history book that we have, which in fact we made copies of for you, for those who want, which details her writings as a 14-year-old. And I was amazed again at the writings of that period. They call it the 5-day period in February, where it was the worst bombings and the worst horrific nightmare. It was sort of just the sad part before liberation really happened. And she wrote about it. And again, I was sort of touched by it, because for us here in the library, one of the things that we're very proud of is our World War II collection of memoirs by civilians and by military people. In fact, one of the distinguished authors, James Scott, wrote his book on Rampage, using much of our material, using much of the material we had used to interview Mrs. Lourdes Montinola, Jessie Lichauco, etc. And so for me, Fely comes into our lives, and again, we are so happy to be able to have Fely speak to us. She is so invaluable to oral history. It's especially as each year passes. I don't want to sound morbid. It's just that those who keep at it and live life have so much to be able to share with us. So we are going to record her, and in fact, we will upload her talk to our website, so that then you can tell friends also to be able to see this interview. I guess my last thing was just how do we instill not forgetting history? Because I'm perplexed at the recent events of having the same president, I cannot believe that we had this thing called people power, and we're sort of rewinding things. And so, to me, it's all about forgetting history. And I just found out that, like, for example, in the United States, 60% of Americans no longer know who Douglas MacArthur is. That sort of statistics, I'm sure the statistics here are about the same. With the absence of history, especially in our grade school and in high school, that has already been sort of almost eliminated. So the way I think we're going to have to make sure that we don't forget our history is to listen to people like Fely. We are sort of fortunate, very fortunate, and grateful to be able to have her to speak, and so that we can pass down whatever she said to us to generations to come. I understand that she has several grandchildren here, and so clearly that's a wonderful thing to see that even in a personal basis, this thing is happening. The way we're going to do this is a conversation, as we call it. That's what Fely wanted. Felys is very insecure about just talking. This is I think her first time to ever do this to an audience. So what she wants is that I distract her by asking her questions and pinning her down, and then she has to answer regardless of whether or not there's all these prying eyes. So that's what I'm going to do. So are we ready, Fely?
I hope so. I hope so.
Okay. So I did give her these questions, so there's no surprise. We have had witnesses to World War II speak at the library about their experiences, and given the passage of time, they were always young witnesses then. You were 14 years old. So when you speak about that period in time, is there something cathartic about speaking about that period?
Well, cathartic, yes, but right after the
Yeah, you can hear.
right after it all happened, I could not talk about it. I could not even try to think about it, although it was always there inside my head. But it was not possible for me to be able to voice it. Maybe it is something like the war veterans who did the Death March. None of them ever wanted to talk about what happened to them then. And even long afterwards, they could not talk about it. In my case, I was able to write down each day as it happened from the day that we heard that the Americans had finally entered Santo Tomas to liberate the Americans there. So I decided to start writing my diary as it was from that day onwards. That was February 3, I think. And we only found out about it because my neighbor was Don Ricardo Mascuñana, the husband of Doña Paching Mascuñana. And he was very kind to us. He let us use his well. He always used to climb on the ladder and talk to us over the fence. And this day, he called us and told us, something happened in Santo Tomas. The Americans are there. And when he said that, I said, how did you find that out? At least my father was the one who talked to him. And he said, I found it out by telephone. But the whole trouble is, well, I was talking to this man, my friend who lives in Sao Paulo. The telephone line got cut. But that was fine. We heard about it. And from that time on, my father decided that we should have always ready with us 2 pieces of flour sacks that we had to wash and clean well. And we turned it inside out and then sewed the edges together so that we could sling it over our shoulder. And he called it caballas. I suppose that's Spanish for saddlebags. And on one side was food. On the other side was clothing. And we had to have that ready with us from that day on, February 3. So that's how it all started.
Thank you. Well, your diary, which you can either get a copy of, or if we ran out of it, you can go to our website and you can download the PDF of this of her diary. Your diary has a directness in it, in contrast to other diaries that are somewhat circumspect. But I am reminded of the diary of Anne Frank, which is kind of direct. And I think it has a lot to do with age because they were young. They were both young. So, was this directness due to your youthful age, or was it trying to present a writing style that was honest and real?
When I decided to write it all out, I I didn't want to be sensational. I I had heard so many terrible and gruesome experiences at that time, but I didn't want to be um, I didn't want to be movie like or sensational. I just wanted it as I saw it. And I saw it as a girl of 14 going on 15.
You had been somewhat criticized by people who said that your writing is just a little too brash. You told me that too. So
Yes.
why do you think they thought that your writing was so brash?
Well, because I was using the language of that time. Um, I remember Hilda Cordero Fernando was so amused because I ended one part of the one section of the diary by saying, "And how?" And then there were also other English usages which are not used today.
Well, it turns out that what you see or what you read is already a cleaned up version, an antiseptic version by Hilda Cordero Fernando. So the sort of slang and almost witty kind of witty is a little too cute, but anyway, she was very she uses her words very well.
Well,
Are totally out there, are gone. Yes.
well, you must remember that we had a dearth of books to read at that time, and my tatay had the entire Harvard classics in our bookshelf, and of course the encyclopedia, which of course I did look at it. But then we also were fortunate to be able to make use of the library of Ateneo de Manila. And so we had access to all kinds of books. And at that age, I could have confined myself to, the shall we say, the penny novels of that
Oh, yeah.
time. But no, there were not much penny novels of the time. What we had was the more classical
Classic.
books. But then, because of the movies of that time and the American influence of all this so-called slang of that time, that was what I made use also in the way I wrote.
Yes, in many ways, Fely reminds me of my mother, who is about her age. She's passed away, but she had that kind of slangness, and she picked it up from the American GIs, and they thought that was cute, right?
Yes.
So, on to another topic. You now have seen and heard young people, and you wonder, do you sense that young people have a limited knowledge of World War II history? And is this a natural progression of time and forgetting? Or are young Filipinos in particular not taught to understand the history of World War II in the Philippines?
Well, I think that there are so many things that our young folks now have to contend with. Number one is the cell phone. Another one is the iPad. And all the extra information they get from it, which is so current and so interesting. So what do I have to do with things that happened 40, 50, 70 years ago? When this is so much nicer, so much more with it.
So do you feel like you're without it? Are you out of it then? You seem marginalized now.
No,
Oh,
no.
right. So, what kept your sanity during that period when at a young age you saw death and destruction all around you?
I think it's because we live with the hope, always with the hope that freedom would come to us again. We always live with the optimism that the Americans would come and save us. We always thought that they would come. It's just like waiting for the Messiah. Um, you think
Let's change. Oh, there. Go ahead.
you think you think of the future where you can have candy again, American candy, when you can have peaches, when you can have all the nice things that you were unable to procure at this time. Remember, the grocery stores then are not the grocery stores of today. The grocery stores were little, just like the lower part of an accessoria, and with shelves filled with canned goods, carnation, Welch grape juice. Those were the things that we knew.
Good. So, were there happy moments throughout this period? And did your age protect you at times from what the grown-ups worried about?
Yes, there were many happy times. And those happy times usually came about in the morning when we went to Mass at Ateneo. We just walked the distance from Padre Faura across Taft Avenue all the way to Ateneo. We went to 6 o'clock Mass in the morning and 5 o'clock Mass, 5 o'clock benediction in the afternoon. And we had the wonderful opportunity of meeting up with our friends in church, because then we would start whispering to each other what latest cuento cochero we heard. And some of it were accurate, and some of it were really cuento cochero. But one thing wonderful about that time was to be able to use the library also of Ateneo. And also the opportunity of being able to go to Mass and go to benediction and renew our hope that freedom would come soon. And that freedom that would come soon came every single year until 1945. And yet when that freedom came, it came with a lot of pain and a lot of hardship.
So, what events or moments in that war saved your life?
What moment? Several moments. Several moments. During that period, uh, because I continued my piano lessons under my teacher, Marcela Agoncillo, who was the daughter of the original Marcela who sewed the Filipino flag. Well, she was a piano teacher from St. Scholastica. So that piano technique was this way. And that is how we learned our piano. And during that time, the Japanese people who were here over us tried very hard to befriend us and to give us a lot of opportunities for culture, etc. And so we had music competitions, we had piano competitions, we had voice contests. I remember Galado Jose was one of those who became the top pianist, young pianist of that time, and Rosario Buencamino also among the girls. And during a voice competition, Celerina Pujante, who she later married Kayabyab, won by giving the best performance in voice. And all these musical presentations were held usually in St. Scholastica or else in Capitol Theater in Avenida Rizal. Those were the places that we went to, and we used the tranvia in order to get from this place to that place. So we had a lovely time with our friends going by tranvia to attend these affairs. Of course, my parents would not allow us to go to the vaudeville where they had Pugo and Tugo. Oh, they were so funny. They were comedians and they were so funny. But the whole trouble is they got into trouble with the Japanese because at one presentation they exhibited, I think it was Pugo. He exhibited his arm, and there were 5 wristwatches there.
Oh.
Because that was how the Japanese were. The Japanese soldiers loved watches. And if you were walking on the sidewalk and he saw your watch and he wanted your watch, he would just take it from you and wear it on his arm. That was how it was then. So how could the Japanese expect us to love them when they treated us like animals? You are walking along, and then he comes around, and then you don't bow properly. He can slap you and just leave you there, not knowing what happened. What bad thing did you do? And what we girls hated because we used to go to church all together from Padre Falga all the way to Ateneo. We had to pass that part of UP where they had pillboxes and air raid shelters right beside the street. And what we were so afraid of was this particular box, air raid shelter here, whatever. There was always a Japanese there. Every time we passed by, he would start to take off his pants. And so we girls had to look the other way. But then we were also afraid to look the other way because he might get mad and start slapping us. So there's nothing we could do except to walk fast away.
You can't win.
Those are happy moments.
I don't want to hear the sad ones. Start crying. So, just two more questions, then we'll open it up to the public. There are persons around the world who speak about their experiences as a child, being hustled into a concentration camp or surviving a nuclear bomb attack in Hiroshima. You survived and wrote about the wide and horrific destruction of Manila. Do you share the feelings of those survivors in letting people know so they do not forget?
Do you want to know how and why I started this?
Sure.
Because after we were rescued, after we had crossed Pasig River from the Pandacan, Santa Ana side, across over to Santa Mesa near Hipodromo, we felt such relief because we knew that we would be safe. We thought we would always be safe. And because of that, I thought I would be able to sleep peacefully. But it was not to be. For about 2 weeks after that, I could not sleep because I developed a hacking cough, which would not stop, and I could not sleep unless I was sitting upright. And my tatay took pity on me, and he borrowed several sheets of pad paper from the host of the house, and he gave me a pencil, and he said, "Write everything out, and then give it to me." And that is what I did. I decided to write it starting February 3. And it ended, I think, the 14th, when we were out. And then 69 years later, I was able to look at it again. Because after I wrote it, I gave it to my tatay, and he kept that sheaf of papers, and I never saw it again until several years later. And because of that, I was able to sleep peacefully. But after I had written all of that, I could not talk about it. And I could not ask anybody about what happened to them either.
Okay. The last question, although I did ask you, and you said you don't know if you have an answer, but this is my last question. With China's incursion into Philippine territory and North Korea's bellicose actions, are you worried about the future? And do you see a repeat of history?
Yes, who would not be worried with all the news about the West China Sea, and about how our fishermen are accosted? Who would not be worried about that? But then, if you ask me whether it could happen again, my 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 tatay would be first one to tell you that history always repeats itself. So I will really never know, and I will not think of it at the present time.
Okay, well said. Um, Now let's open the questions to anybody here who'd like to ask Fely.
I remember the stories of my mom. She was, I think, she was born in 1922, so she was 23 years old because of the war. And told us a story about the Americans bringing all these goodies. That is the thing that is ingrained in us. That my mom was so impressed with all the Americans coming back and bringing all the goodies that it had been her lifelong dream for all of her 7 children. My brother is here too, to migrate to the U.S. Did you have that feeling about Americans?
When on February 13th, that was the day that there was a GI, but we didn't see what the color of his skin was because all we saw was his helmet and his gray olive uniform. He put his head out through the hole in the wall between our property and the property next door, and he was whistling softly. And so we were, I don't think the Japanese soldier would whistle softly at us. And when we saw that he was white, he was an American, that is when we knew that freedom was in somewhere near us. And there were several grown men in our group who could not stop crying with relief. But in our case, I was wounded at that time as well as my father. My father, because we had a small cuartito in the burned portion of our house, the concrete stairs there at the back had a little cuartito where we had earlier stored water, munggo, and rice, and also the books of my tatay as well as the books of Ateneo, which they had entrusted to us, 20 books per family. And but then, because there were 5 or 6 families who were running with us to safety together back to this our house, how could we in conscience stay inside the cuartito and have a mother and her baby stay outside and an old lady who was my neighbor? How could we let them stay outside? So we asked them to stay inside while we stayed on the ground outside. And when that happened, there was a big explosion in the middle of the night, and I was lying on my side, and I felt as if something very heavy fell on my side. And my tatay was lying down with his hand over his forehead, and the shrapnel entered here. And if his hand had not been there, he would be dead. And when my nanay saw him bleeding, because the fires that started all around were so bright, he could see that my tatay was bleeding from that wound. She could not attend to me at all. And I said, I cannot breathe. I tried to breathe. I cannot breathe. And she said, you have to wait. Your tatay is wounded badly. So fortunately, somebody in our group, Mrs. Elicanio, the wife of Dr. Tranquilino Elicanio, was a nurse. And she's also a neighbor, so she was with us in the running. And before this happened, she was very quiet. We never heard anything from her. But this time, she went into action, and she was the one who went around the different people who were wounded, and she was the one who attended to their wounds. So that was the night of the 13th. The following day, the 14th, that was when we saw the American coming through the hole. And that was when everybody decided to start walking towards Paco Cemetery and out towards Santa Ana, Bandacan, and then there was a pontoon bridge there because that is a narrow part of Pasig River at that point. And the American Army had put up a pontoon bridge there. Incidentally, the inventor of the pontoon bridge is a Filipino, Melchor. So that is where we passed, going to victory, going to freedom.
There's another
I
question.
I have another question.
Yes.
So, I'm sure there was a lot of emotional trauma and mental trauma, what you went through with the war. And I read a little bit of your excerpts right here. So my grandmother was already an older lady who went through the same thing you did, and she actually vowed in her life never to buy anything Japanese, never to have my mother date anybody Japanese, no, not buy a Japanese car, and she was very anti-Japanese until the end. Did you ever go through that stage? And
Yes.
and how did you heal from that? I mean, because when they say, if you want to heal from that, you have to forgive.
Yes.
So,
Yes. True. Right. It took me how many years? That was 1945. It was only in 1984
wow.
that I was able to look and feel about the Japanese in a normal, forgiving manner. And do you know why? It's because my son, my number 6 son, after graduation, was taken in by a Japanese company, and now he's even more Japanese than the Japanese. And because he was in Japan, naturally, we had to go and visit him. And so my husband and I went to Japan several times. And this necklace I bought in Japan. But you have to forgive.
Yes.
But then when we got to Japan after all that time, I could not understand why they were so cruel and so crude and so angry towards the Filipinos. When you see them there in Japan and they're so polite, but bowing to you.
Yeah.
But I could not understand it. I think it's their culture. And maybe because of their samurai background, that there is an inner sense of cruelty that stays there still. I don't know.
Any other questions? Good.
There's still the issue of comfort women.
Oh,
Yeah, what can you say about that? I mean,
when you are hungry, you will do anything. When you are hungry, you will do anything. Many of them went into Japanese arms easily that way. But what they did not know was that they would be regarded as disposable material afterwards. They did not realize that.
They haven't yet really made amends for that, I think.
Because they don't feel they need to make amends, because that's what they have been doing in other countries that they conquered. That's what they did to Korea when they entered Korea. That's what they did in you must have heard about the rape of Nanking, about the cruelty and the torture that they inflicted on the people there, and in Manchuria too. Maybe it's their samurai background. I do not know.
You had a question?
But
Hi,
again,
Fely. I'm so touched and so impressed by your diary and the fact that you revealed now you were not writing this on the days themselves, but that these were recalled later on. Did I get it right? And you could not sleep, and then your dad told you to write. Your dad told you to write, and you started recalling the previous days.
how is that again?
You started, you were not writing this diary day by day. You were writing in retrospect.
No.
Yeah, that's so impressive that you could recall everything.
I have been used to doing a diary actually. Ever since I was about 10 years old, I used to
see.
do diaries
That's
already.
it.
But this time, I did it diary form, day by day, as I remembered it.
It was a recollection rather than actual.
Not There is no possibility that you could do any writing when you are running away from death.
Wow, it's really fascinating. I mean,
So it's
I
only
appreciate your
after.
writing so much. It's beautifully done.
No, not really, because the writing I did was the writing of a young girl.
That's it.
So it's not the writing of a polished journalist or a writer like you.
No, 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 no. No, I really admire it.
So,
I'm so impressed.
but when I wrote this, I wrote it with the idea that I will not go into hysterics or go into sensationalism in describing the gruesome parts of my story. That's why, if you will notice, I did not try to embellish.
No.
Yeah. I have not finished reading it. I just saw it now. I just saw it now. I read first few paragraphs. Are you in the later part of your writing? Are you talking more about the atrocities? Although you say you don't want to be sensationalistic or dramatic, but because you must have witnessed a lot of atrocities. Did you also talk about them here?
I only talked about the things that were told to me by the people who came by after we were rescued, and some of their stories were pretty gruesome. For example, my childhood friend, all the time in school, the family was in their air raid shelter in their house, and the Japanese came in, gatatatat,
Wow. Yeah.
and the mother and the father were killed instantly, but my friend did not die instantly. And the survivor told me later that that whole evening they had to listen to her calling out, Mama, Papa. And what I could not understand is why she included me in her calls. She said, Fely, Fely. And then she kept on repeating it the whole night until it got softer and softer and no more. So, for a long time, after I heard that story, for a long time, I could not sleep thinking about what was it that she wanted to ask me. Why me? With her mother and father, yes. But why me? So it took me a long time to find out. And up to now, I still do not know.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Oh, yes.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Fely Zafra-Reyes.
Yes.
I admire you and I salute you and I commend you for the strength of your spirit and your very clear explanation. And I hope it helps you a lot because of sharing with us this very difficult time in your life. I only have two questions, ma'am. Number one is we just celebrated the anniversary of the Holocaust, the liberation of the concentration camp victims, the concentration camp victims in Germany and Poland, all which they just celebrated their anniversary. Do you have a network of similar victims of the Japanese war atrocities? Number one,
No.
I believe you should
As
form.
far as our family was concerned, they were nameless. But I want to tell you how life was at that time during the period between 1942 and 1945, the so-called period of peace. We had telephones, but at that time, we had party lines. And aside from party lines, I think there were other people listening in also to what you had to say. And also, aside from telephones, we had newspapers, and the newspapers were always filled with grand pictures of the victories of the Japanese Navy and of the complete annihilation of the American Navy. It was always that way. And so that was how life was for us. And we could write letters to each other. We had a post office which was working well, but the letters were always censored. In fact, I have a friend whose father was a relative of one of the so-called collaborators of that time. And her father used to write love letters to his future wife, her mother. And somebody in the same office in Malacanang said, "Oh, they like to read his letters." You were always under observation. Big Brother is watching you all the time. That was how it was.
The second question I wanted to ask is just a personal Are you related to Nicholas Zafra, the historian? How is Nicholas Zafra? Are you related to him, the historian? Yes.
That's my tatay. My mother is Luz Zafra, and she was a teacher in FEU.
Yes. My father was a colleague of Nicholas Zafra, Gregorio Zaide. Yes. So that's why I asked.
Gregorio Zaide.
I asked him if you were
The famous
related
historian.
to the Zafras or the
Yes.
ASS of FEU. Because one of the Nicolas Reyes Jr. married Necohuaco, Josephine Cohuaco, and the father of, I think, Serviliano Aquino was one of the witnesses to the Tokyo War Crimes trial. And also Corazon Noble, the actress, whose real name was Patrocinio Abad. She also rendered a testimony of the incidents that they had seen. You should, I think, record your memories
Yes.
and form a network of existing
Yeah.
sons and daughters so that you can go around schools. Like the victims of the Holocaust, they go around schools and they impart their personal memories, and this makes a very good impression on the students how to teach them oral history and the memories of your generation. Thank you very much.
I wanted to tell you also about, you were asking about happy moments.
Yes.
One happy moment that I can think of at that time was how we would go to Paspaco, to the house of Dean Leoncio Monzon. I wonder if he was later the founder of the MLQ University. And his wife was a machongista. And that was a big happy moment for us every time we went to visit them, because there was always a lot of food on the table and a lot of laughing because they were all machongistas in that house. So that I can remember, that was a really happy moment for us.
It's good to know how Mahjong saved your life. Any other questions?
So, as a young woman, no, you were 14, no, and I think I'm wondering, what was your gimmick with your friends during this time? Let's talk about happy moments now while we're at it. What did you and your young friends do beyond going to school and going to Ateneo and Mass? Meron ba kayong, and play mahjong, no? Did young women have any activities during this period? Like you and your friends? Like what did you do for fun?
Uh, at that time, remember, I was just a second year student in PWU at that time, and the Japanese had a great liking for Radio Taisho, and we used to have those big affairs in Luneta, where students from the different schools were asked to go to Luneta and start exercising together in time to music. I can remember the music. Dun, 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 dun. That was the music then. And then we used to gossip about how, oh, look at that girl over there. Oh, she doesn't have her bloomers on. And then there would also be the boys' school. I think La Salle was open, but not Ateneo. And there were also other boys' schools there. So it was a thrill, I suppose, for many of my friends to see them all there together in Luneta, gathered for that Radio Taisho. I don't know if you would call that a happy moment.
You get try and find happiness wherever you can. Any other last question back there? One more, and that's it. We'll end this.
How normal did it start feeling for you months after the war? How normal did life start feeling for you after the war? When did it start to feel normal, like as if comparable to the life after before the war?
Can you interpret?
He wanted to know when life became normal to you after the war.
When what?
When did life become normal to you? Like everyday normal.
I suppose it became normal right away, as fast as we could. As soon as I got my papers and gave it to my tatay, all of a sudden my cough disappeared and I was up and about, but not a single word about what happened to us, to anybody. And nobody else among my friends would talk about their experience.
Wow.
But it was life back to normal for us. It had to be because we were homeless, we had no money, Nanay and Tatay had no work because they were teachers, and teachers, you don't open schools right away. It takes time. So my nanay had to work, had to go out and work in Picao.
Ika, what's that?
It was a government office, but then in place of, aside from the salary, nanay was given a ration of dried eggs, butter, spam.
You have a question? Somebody have a question? Did you raise your hand, Desiree?
Oh, yeah, earlier, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Last question.
Alright. Just to probably answer also Miss Daida's question. Yes, there is a network. There is a group. We're called Memorare in Manila, 1945. Some of the members are here, and our memorial is at Intramuros, 2 blocks away from San Agustin, if you've been there. And so we're active in preserving and commemorating the 100,000 Manileños who were killed during the war. And we do exhibits. Right now, there's an open exhibit there if you want to visit, and we do seminars and stuff like that. But the last question, Tita, is we were talking about the happy moments. I know this is going to be painful, but I always hear from our elders in Memorare how bad the situation was during the Battle of Manila in terms of food, water, and when you read James Scott's book, the dead were everywhere and debris everywhere. What were your recollections during the time that your odyssey from your house to Santa Ana and Banda and then across to safety? Do you remember what the ambience was like? Were there dead people in the streets?
Can you please repeat that?
Kanina, Tita, we were
Do I
talking about happy
remember?
moments. So, how was it like during your odyssey from your house to the safety of Santa Mesa?
Okay.
Did you see like corpses, debris?
We came from Patifalga. So we walked straight towards Paco Cemetery, along the side, over to one of those streets there. I cannot remember the names, but I remember there was a hospital there that was owned by Miguel Lahemil. And I remember passing that way. And then out, I'm rather hazy now about how we got out. I remember passing through San Gregorio. That is a street that crosses a creek into Paspaco. I remember that because there was somebody who came out from his house, a certain Mr. Capistrano, And he waved to us. He didn't know us at all. And he was inviting us to stay with them. But we had to go on. We had to leave that place. And we came out to somewhere in Pandacan, I think, and out on Santa Ana. And it was in Santa Ana where we encountered an American Army hospital. And that American hospital gave us slices of Pan Americano and some candies and water that was clean. And we thought it was heaven to be able to eat Pan Americano again. The white bread, oh, that was wonderful. And then after Santa Ana, we went on. By that time, my tatay was quite weak from loss of blood from his hand. And I could barely breathe because my shrapnel came in here. So an army truck passed by and offered to bring us to a hospital on the other side. So actually, I did not walk across that pontoon bridge. It was my family that did. But my tatay and I were brought by that truck over to Mary Child's Hospital. But you must remember that we had my Lola with us. And my Lola at that time was 76 years old. And she walked all the way without complaint, all the way from Padre Faula to Santa Mesa, walking on that pontoon bridge.
Wow,
Okay?
history of travel here. So why don't we give Fely a big round of applause? You don't want to stress Fely too much. Thank you very much, Fely, for speaking.
Thank you too for giving me
Turns
this
out that
opportunity.
Fely is a renowned pianist, and so I've managed to badger her to make a concert for the benefit of the Ortigas Library. She says she excels in kundimans. We'll let you know. First, I have to roll in a piano here. I don't know what to do. But thank you very much, Fely. Another round of applause. Thank you.